try to put across topics in physics, mathematics, science to as wide an audience as possible.
Result, there are more
sometimes the more specialist than others. And we try to do it in as quirky and as raw a style as possible. The first time we academics see these is when they go online. The guy that drives it is somebody called Brady Harron, who I'll speak a bit more in a second. But just to give you an idea. So it's www.sixtysymbols.com or www.youtube.com/60symbols. Why do we do this? How did it start? I'm going to tell you a little. That's what I'm going to spend maybe half an hour or so telling you about good things about YouTube, education, edutainment, call it, and bad things. Because it's fun to do these. And the audience is quite large, as I'll tell you now, for not just 60 Symbols and the type of channels we do in Nottingham. I'll have another show of hands. Minute Physics. Hands up. About that. Right, okay, a few more. And that's an exceptionally successful channel, and it's great in that we can communicate our science and basic fundamental principles in science to a wide audience, but what do we lose by the sort of quick fix aspect of YouTube? So, Nottingham's involvement, in terms of the power of YouTube, is basically driven by this guy. This guy's Brady Harron, used to be a video journalist. Before that, he worked for the Murdoch Empire in his native Australia, but we'll forgive him that. And he is incredibly prolific, incredibly smart, incredibly canny, and I'm not going to say any more nice things about him, but he has driven these projects in, as you can see, over the last few years. So 60 Symbols has got about 370,000 subscribers. It's close to 30 million views across about 250 videos, something like that. The most successful video to date, I think, has picked up something like 1 million views on this channel. For his other channels, one of which is Numberphile, which focuses more on the numbery side of things than the physics, I think the most popular video on there is probably approaching 3 to 4 million views, something like that. So that's a big audience. And it's great that we can reach out and talk to them and try and put across what we're doing. What I really like about 60 Symbols is we deliberately forego sort of fancy graphics or fancy direction or any type of, I don't know, artificial approach, I'd like to think. What happens is Brady comes along, he films us, and as I say, the first time we academics see those videos is when they go online. We have no control over the editing. And that, the first few times, is bloody scary. Because when it goes up there, you know, if you've made a slip, and we all make slips, the YouTube audience will be on you like a shot. And I've had not only the YouTube comments box filled up, I've had my email inbox fill up with you said this, you said that. And sometimes they're right, and often they're wrong. But that's an argument you really don't want to get into. But the important aspect of this is that it's allowing these people into your research. It's allowing a huge audience into the lab, as it were. And that's what I really like about it. This is what scientists do. We're not just automatons. We're not just white coat wearing, mad hair, goggles, all those stereotypes. And it breaks down those stereotypes. But as I said, 60 Symbols is one. Here's one of definitely the most popular physics YouTube channel. So let's look at that subscriber number up there. And let's make it big. And this was a couple of months ago, actually. So I haven't, sorry. But that's 2.25 million. Probably closer to 2.5 million now, maybe beyond 2.5 million subscribers. So people who, when he releases a new video, it'll appear in their inbox, YouTube inbox. That's really quite remarkable. And interestingly, you can see it's called Minute Physics, with the idea is that you put across these concepts in a couple of minutes. And you can see why is the solar system flat, and a range of other great videos. This guy is a guy called Vsauce, also does lots of science videos, mixed in with some very weird, wacky, and unusual stuff. And again, this is from the wiki page a couple of months ago. 6.8 6.9 million subscribers. Huge audience, right across the world. Khan Academy, this is Sal Khan. Again, in terms of maths, education. This is actually quite, again, a very sort of raw and simple channel, or at least it started off like that, where it's just him. There's not even any live action, as it were. You just get the PowerPoint slide, or you get this slide, and he's writing, and he's talking over the top of it. Sal Khan, yeah, so same idea. Huge audience, huge numbers of subscribers, and simple videos that really, often get the message across very well. The other great thing about doing it like this is that we can reach, people will come and watch those videos, and they might be interested in science, and they generally are interested in science or maths, and they might be looking for a very specific thing. However, you know what it's like, as I do, browsing YouTube. You can stumble upon some stuff, and what that allows you to do is, as it says there, is to preach beyond the converted. So this was I'm a huge heavy metal fan. So this was a song we put together where it's a fairly kitschy, I guess, and fairly quirky way of mixing maths and metal. But we took a fundamental constant called the golden ratio, and we mapped that onto scales, and we based a song around it. Okay. As I say, I'm a big metal fan. So for those of you who don't like metal, tough. So the rhythms, the riffs, the lyrics are all based. So, dear me, that was a lot of fun to do. So we worked with a guy called Dave Brown, another YouTuber, and that's how that interaction started. He saw a video we did on pi and translating digits of pi to notes on a guitar with some of truly appalling guitar playing, and he got in touch and said, yeah, we can do better than this. And that's what resulted. So that was a huge amount of fun. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I'll come back to this, beyond preaching to the converted, because we put that online. And you can, if you're interested, you can read all about how the maths and the numbers and the music are related. So, and these are some of the comments. And on the evening news, metalhead students acing exams, cause unknown. This is what I really liked. I think you just tricked me into liking math, clever bastards. That's, that was a little sort of yes when we got that comment, amongst other comments like that. Because you've taken somebody who might just run a mile from the mere mention of maths and gone, well, let's put it in a different context. See if you enjoy it. Oh, you do enjoy it? Well, actually, if you look a bit more into the background of this, there's some very, very interesting links here between music and maths that you can pull out. So it's a way of getting this across in a different context, which, in a lecture theatre, you just can't do. And it's also due to the breadth of the audience. And that's what's great about it, and that's what's difficult about it. Because when I speak to you, I have a rough idea what sort of background you have. If I go into a first year of undergraduate, second year of undergraduate, third year, if I go right to an A-level college, if I go and speak at a primary school, I know my audience. And I know roughly where I have to pitch things. When you're putting a YouTube, doing one of these videos across, the problem is you can't please everyone. And we will have people, and I've had people email me going, well, why didn't you talk about this, and why didn't you talk about this, and you missed this out, and I can't believe you didn't talk about this elemental piece of physics which is related to that video. It's a 5-minute video. It's not a tutorial, and it's not a course. And similarly, at the same time, you'll have emails coming in from people going, that was completely over my head. What the hell were you talking about? So that's, as I said, the brilliant thing about it is the breadth of the audience, and the very difficult thing about it is the breadth of the audience. I've a particular fetish for trying to mix up heavy metal with physics. So we actually did a 60 Symbols video on this yesterday. Some of you might know there's a very, very close, I'm not joking, very close relationship between the sound of a heavy metal guitar and the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. But if you're interested, go and read. I don't know why I'm shining the blazer over here. If you're interested, go and read that blog. And of course, you don't have to just preach, to the unconverted. You can also preach to the choir. So you can put these online, and this is for students in Nottingham. Some of the videos that I've done over the last while. Basically, I'd never have thought about doing this if I hadn't been doing those videos with Brady. And guess what time of the year that is? So they're obviously being watched. It'd be nice if it was a sort of more linear climb over the course, but that's absolutely fine. And the great thing, what I'd love to do is effectively get rid of the standard lecture format, instead of doing this, put it online, there's your material, and then spend the lecture actually using that as workshops, using that as problem solving, using that to build in interactivity. Because we're using a format to get this information across, which is millennia old. Me talking to you. I really do think that it's a very archaic system. Okay, if you'll indulge me, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the day job and the research I do. I notice there's lots of nice posters out there. But also from the context of sort of getting that YouTube audience into the lab, showing them what science is all about. And you might think, well, everybody knows what science is all about. The week before last, I helped organize a conference in Nottingham called Circling the Square. I won't go into the reasons why we call it Circling the Square. But the idea was to try and bring together those in the social sciences, those who work at the policy science interface, physicists, chemists, biologists, even philosophers, and get them together into one room talking to each other. And what really came across is that particularly social scientists and sociologists have a rather strange view at times of just how science works. So I'll talk you through very briefly some of the work we do, but our work focuses in Nottingham, the work that our group does, focuses on scanning probe microscopy. And many of you are scanning probe microscopists. Show of hands, if you're brave enough. Okay, a couple of hands. Basically, a scanning probe microscope is a microscope like no other. No lenses, no mirrors, no optical elements at all. You take a sharp tip, you bring it in close to a surface. And then you scan that tip back and forth over the surface, and you measure some type of interaction. And by sharp, I mean atomically sharp, or even better, terminated in a single bond, in a single dangling bond, as we call it. And once if that's the sharpness of your measurement tool, then your image resolution is comparable to that. And the state of the art is measuring and imaging intramolecular and intermolecular bonds. Okay. We're at that level where we can approach that type of resolution. And the way we do that is with a technique called atomic force microscopy, and this is such an elegant technique, developed like many of these techniques by IBM Zurich, where you oscillate, you have a tip on the end of a cantilever, you oscillate it back up and, as you can see, up and down over the surface. And by measuring shifts in the resonant frequency and the frequency of that cantilever, you can work out what the force is on the end of the cantilever. And then you move it back and forth across the surface, you map that shift in resonant frequency, and you can build up images at the atomic level. And you put it all in ultra-high vacuum systems, which are always fun. And then you try and do some experiments. So one of the experiments we were really keen to do was to look at the limits of miniaturizing a switch. So a light switch is a toggle switch. You press on it, you get one state. You press on the other end of it, you get another state. Can you reduce that all the way down to the atomic level? And luckily, nature's very kind to us, because on certain silicon surfaces, if you cut through the silicon crystal in a particular way, the atoms at that surface arrange themselves, they pair up to form dimers, and they align in rows for wonderful surface science reasons I won't go into. And even better, to reduce the energy further, and the chemists amongst you will know what a Jahn-Teller distortion is. You get a type of Jahn-Teller distortion where one atom moves down and the other atom moves up. And so you get, sort of built in, for free, little switchable units. The question is, can you bring a tip in, bond with one of those atoms, pull it up, and then move the tip away and leave it in that state? And if you do it at low enough temperature, well, actually, yes, it works. And the idea is sort of to try and miniaturize the type of mechanical computing that Babbage did 150 years ago and bring it down to the atomic level. And so what you can see here is an atomic force microscope image. Each individual blob is a single silicon atom. The bright bits are the atoms that are up. You can't image the atoms that are down because they're too far away from the tip. But what you can do is you know by symmetry where that other atom is, so you can plonk the tip on top of it and flip it round. And that's what's happened here. This is speeded up immensely. This took 8 hours. So what's important here, you've got this zigzag ordering here, and you've got a sort of defect in that zigzag ordering and a defect in that zigzag ordering. So what that zigzag ordering represents is up atom, up atom, up atom. So you've got this type of configuration as you go down a row. And what the postdoc Adam Sweetman wanted to do was, let's see what happens if we take this and we try and merge it with this. If we try to drive this one towards this, what happens? Do they interact? Do they pass through each other? Do they annihilate each other? And the contrast isn't great, but hopefully you can see what's going on. What we're going to end up with is a perfectly zigzag row down here, where those two, we call them phase-on defects, those two defects have annihilated each other, and you get this perfect row. Okay, so that's pretty well all the science I'm really going to talk to you about. It's a festival about communicating science. But what we did is we were very lucky and fortunate that at one point during this, Brady was in the lab and actually managed to capture some of these experiments going on, which means that you can bring a big audience into the lab with you and go, look, this is what we do, and this is how it works. This is how we interpret data. You know, there's an awful lot of worrisome things that I'm going to come to towards the end with regard to peer review and the deficiencies in peer review and biases, observer bias, and how data can be distorted. We're publicly funded. I would argue we've got an obligation to be as open as possible, and that's what this allows you to do. And as you can see, the joy of a breakthrough. So it was, I got rather overexcited and enthusiastic the first time it worked. So. But this is great. So here's our lab book. And this is actually quite tidy for us. And I love this comment under the video. At my uni, I've censored it for you. At my uni, I'd get my chopped off for having a lab book in that state. They lied. Real scientists are messier than me even on a bad day. And we probably are. We probably are. But as long as that lab book is legible, as long as the data is there, and as long as you can take that and work from it and get a match up with the files you've recorded, so what if it's messy? As long as it's legible. Okay, those are the great things about communication by YouTube, communication through online channels. I want to really focus on YouTube. It allows you to connect with this broad audience, allows you to bring them in the lab, allows you to explain in a different way than you can in any other context. But, right, I'm just going to play this. One of the worst things about these videos, I must admit, by far the worst thing, is watching my hairline move back over the years. So this was about 5 years ago. Listen to what Brady asks me at the start, or what the exchange between me and Brady right at the start. I'll keep my mouth shut for a change, just so that you can hear this. What I want to try and explain over the next 10 minutes or so is...
You're not having 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. Over the next few minutes or so, I'll start again. What I'd like to explain over the next few minutes or so is... Right? What I'd like to explain over the next 10 minutes... No, you're not having 10 minutes, because Brady knows, Brady's very canny, that every minute I go beyond a few minutes, the number of views for the video are going to drop. And there's been studies done of this where people look at, is this an 8-minute video? That's not worth my time. If it's a 3-minute video, it's worth a punt. That's really dangerous. That's really dangerous, because then what you end up in is a mechanism, and you know there are lots of competitions in terms of public engagement which tend to focus on this. Get your message across in 3 minutes. Get your message across in 2 minutes. Damn it, get your message across in 30 seconds. Get those tweets circulating. Get as much clickbait in there as possible. Turn it into journalism. Get the headlines and get it out there as quickly as possible. That's really quite dangerous, I would argue. And yet, we get these type of messages. And from one point, one perspective, this is wonderfully gratifying. You get a lovely, warm, fuzzy glow when that was more invigorating than 12 years of public schooling. I've been watching 60 Symbols videos the whole day. Great, so I wish school would have been that kind of education. 5-minute video. It's been put across in engaging and relatively straightforward way. Therefore, I feel really smart and I've got something from that. And you might say, well, why would you whinge about that? Why would that be a problem? And, you know, it's great that that comment's been left there. But I don't know if it's true for you, but certainly for me and other colleagues I've spoken to, any substantial leap I've had in my understanding of physics has not come when I've read something or watched something, and certainly not when I've come and watched something which is 5 minutes long, and I've gone, I get it now. Because if it can get across in 5 minutes, if you can get it across, you have to do it, and it's a difficult concept, you have to do it at a rather superficial level. It's when I felt really stupid. Why can't I get this? It can't be that difficult. Okay, I'll look at another textbook, maybe get another explanation. I'll look at something else, I'll read another paper. And you slowly piece the bits together. But it's painful. Sometimes it can be painful. But that certainly, for me at least, and for, as I say, a number of colleagues have spoken, that's when I make a real leap. Because if I can get it in 2 minutes, it's not really, either it's not conceptually challenging, or the substance has been diluted so much that, you know, the real substance isn't there anymore. So this is controversial. I know it's controversial. I want to leave time at the end for you to harangue me, and so we can debate these type of things. But I would argue, and I'm not the only one, that explanation alone is not education. Certainly in the sciences. And entertainment is certainly not education. And there's this whole area of edutainment where you try to bring in education and entertainment. They are part, certainly, of the education process. And as you say, as you've seen, they can enthuse people, they can bring people in, they can put things in a different context. But this is a really interesting study. This was in Times Higher Education last year. Great lecture. What was it about again? Fluent instruction no more effective than poor delivery in teaching terms. So they looked at the ability of students to grasp material when it was put across by a very enthusiastic, very engaging, very charismatic lecturer compared to a lecturer who was somewhat less of those things and perhaps stood there and just with no body language or whatever and just read directly from notes. No difference. Well, within the size of that study, at least, in terms of the sample size, which seemed to be relatively statistically robust. No real difference at all. And yet, if I want to get good teaching scores, if I want to improve my prospects in Nottingham or any other university, and if any of your lecturers want to improve their prospects for promotion, what do? If you want to get those comments, good comments and good scores on the questionnaires, on the module questionnaires, you entertain. That's what you do. You entertain and you try and make it as engaging and entertaining. I'm not suggesting these are bad things as possible. But what happens, and a couple of colleagues in Nottingham have done this, is that if you do try and flip that around and say, well, okay, the material's online, go and look at that material. Material's in a book, go and look at that material. What we're going to do is we're going to get you to work in the lecture, which is really the way you learn. Anybody learns, is by getting to really engaging with the material on a sort of challenging level. That backfires. And there's good evidence from a couple of experiments in Nottingham that when that's attempted, the results are the students go, oh, hang on, but why are you doing it like this when everybody else, I can just go to the other lectures, I can write stuff down, get it across. Why are you doing it this way? This is going to mean that I don't have the material that I need to answer the questions in the exam, and they get poorer. So by trying to innovate, trying to change the educational system, it can backfire very badly. I must admit, in my experience of what I've decided to do, and it's working out reasonably well, is I think that trying to go wholesale to leave the sort of lecture format behind and dive into something entirely new is a big culture shock, and it's probably to be avoided. But I think there is room for mixing and matching these, where you do put that material across, but at the same time, do you use when you were undergraduates, do you use these clicker things at all, these keypad things? Kind of a show of hands. Okay, a reasonable number. So I find that quite useful. So basically you have multiple choice questions, you hand out clickers, keypads to the students, and the students answer the questions. And that's very good in terms of getting the students to interact with the material, but also exceptionally good for the lecturer, because you think you're doing a reasonably good job of putting the material across. You ask what you think is the simplest possible multiple choice question, and 80% get it wrong. So you realize you're going to have to explain it in a different way. So this guy has gone so far. Is Frank Nushazy from New York. He's, as you can see, a high school physics teacher. I'm not going to play this video. You can look for this online. It's a TEDx talk. And he's gone as far to say that online education is pseudo-teaching, because it gives... The question is, how much deep as opposed to quite shallow and superficial learning goes on. His argument is that very little deep learning goes on. And what he tries to get his physics classes to do is just to, simple problems like this. Is Flappy Bird physics real life? What's the acceleration due to gravity? Etc. And try and work out these type of things. And get the students, just pose that question right at the start. You've got the material, go and read this at home. You're going to come into class and you're going to do this. And what's the acceleration due to gravity in Flappy Bird? Go. This guy, very much along the lines of Nushazy, sort of preempts Nushazy by a number of years. It's a brilliant title, isn't it? It's sort of where I nicked the title of this talk, Confessions of a Converted Lecturer. It sounds like one of those dodgy 70s films. And this guy's at Harvard, and he does this peer instruction method, where not only does he hand the clickers out, he does something which is really quite interesting and flips the whole sort of lecturer-learner dynamic round. And he asks a question, but he doesn't show the students the answers. Ask a question via the clickers. Then he says, right, turn around to the people around you, or to the person sitting beside you, and convince them that your answer is correct. On the basis of, if your answer is correct, you're going to do a damn good job of explaining it. And if your answer isn't correct, you go into, for want of a better term, bullshit. So, and that turns out that works rather well. See, this is what we've got to get beyond. Consequently, lectures simply reinforce students' feelings that the most important step in mastering the material is memorizing a zoo of apparently unrelated examples. XKCD, show of hands. Oh, that's better. Good. If you're not familiar with XKCD, just go and Google it. Actually, you've probably got something to hand now. Google it now and stop listening to me. So this comes back to, in science, some things are just plain difficult. They are conceptually challenging. People don't bang their heads against a wall for years or decades trying to get the bottom of a problem. So, understanding gravity. Space-time is like a rubber sheet. Massive objects distort the sheet, and wait, they distort it because they're pulled down by what? Okay, right, let's dive into the full mathematical framework here. Space-time is like this set of boring, right? The analogy can only be taken so far, right? And that's another danger. Some things just you cannot explain with a simple analogy. Some concepts are just plain difficult. Now, Einstein said some very, very clever things and did some very, very clever work. This is not one of the smarter things he said. If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself, and indeed it might be apocryphal that he said that. It's remarkable how many quotes are attributed to Einstein that he never said. But if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. Now, I've got 2 daughters who are 10 and 8 and a son who's 5. I spend a lot of my time trying to explain things to them. And if I want to try and explain negative temperatures to them, for example, and the Boltzmann distribution, like this. This is Faker, Saoirse, and Neve. So Saoirse, in particular, is an argumentative sod like her dad. And I put that Einstein quote to her, and she said, well, no, that can't be right, because you mightn't be able to find the words that I understand. And the problem is you may have to go very, 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 very far down to get those words. And some concepts are just, particularly, for example, I use this as one example, negative temperatures. I don't mean minus 15 degrees C. I mean below absolute zero. And one of the comments, this was a video we did a while back. It's a challenging concept. I'm not particularly happy with the way I put it across, but I think it's honest. So we got this comment. And you know what? I'm happier with that than with a I feel quite smart now. Because that's a more honest response. This is a bloody difficult concept, and if you don't have the idea of distribution functions, if you don't have the idea of Boltzmann factors, if you don't have the idea of energy levels, then it's extremely difficult to put this across. And you could say, well, you could simplify it down. But at which point do you lose the essence of what this is all about? And I would argue that the essence of this is the Boltzmann distributions. So the great thing as well about the whole 60 Symbols YouTube thing is you get quite a few vitriolic emails at times. Oh, lots and lots of emails written in block capitals, in green ink, claiming that they've discovered a brand new theory of everything. The number of those has gone up. But you do get some very nice and very perceptive emails. All the students and postdocs in the group think I am absolutely mental to engage with anybody in the YouTube comment section. They think that's just the collective stupidity of all mankind distilled right there. And sometimes it is, but for the type of videos Brady does, and he doesn't moderate any of the comments at all, overall, there have been some damn good, discussions there, quite erudite, quite perceptive, and, it's much like Reddit. There were some pretty good discussions on Reddit and the physics forums, etc. So this is one of the emails I got. Your target audience isn't people who already know. It's our children. I see scientists playing, experimenting, explaining, and enjoying the fact that you don't know everything. Show the world that it is okay to not know, because not knowing is what brings the question. And that comes back to the idea that education isn't explanation alone. Education is, here's a problem, try and work it out for yourself. Right. So, okay, I'd like to finish up about 4:45 just to give you some time to feedback on this. Are many of you familiar with this Randy Schekman's stance on cell nature? And not too many. Okay, so Randy Schekman, winner Nobel Prize last year, is basically boycotting Nature, Science, and Cell, those top tier of journals. And you might say, well, hang on, you've done a massive tangent here. You were telling us about YouTube, and now you're talking about this. The important thing is that the essence of the problem is the same. It's putting soundbite above rigor. It's putting, get the message out there in as few words as possible. 140 characters is good. And get that, get as much online excitement about your work. And Schekman, particularly with these journals, argues that they basically put the headline over the robustness of the science. So a couple of disclaimers. There are some very, very good studies published in Nature Science. Don't know about Cell, not my field, but Nature and Science there certainly are. Very good work. There's also some immense crap published in Nature and Science. But one thing that's true for those journals is that the vast number of papers submitted to those journals, the very vast, are rejected long before they get to peer review. They're rejected by the editor. And why does the editor reject it? Particularly as that editor is not working in the field. He rejects it on the basis of, is this newsworthy enough? Is this going to get picked up by the BBC website? Is it going to get picked up by CNN? Is it going to drag more viewers to our website? I'm being rather cynical, but they're a business, and they clearly want to get as wide an audience for the work as possible. And the problem is that newsworthiness and rigor don't always correlate well. Not so far away, this is UCL, and this is a guy called David Colquhoun. If you haven't come across David Colquhoun, he's an emeritus professor of pharmacology. He's got a wonderful blog called Improbable Science. Go and look it up. The other person who's actually in Imperial, whose blog you should read and you should subscribe to now, is Stephen Curry's. I'll be coming to Stephen in a couple of minutes' time. But what's happening now in UCL is that staff are getting monitored in terms of, I wouldn't say quite saying assessed, but their papers are associated with an altmetric score. How many tweets, many Facebook likes, many news outlets, This is exceptionally dangerous. Exceptionally dangerous. Because now what's happening is the newsworthiness is driving the science. We talked about this a couple of minutes right at the start. This is publishers of been forced to withdraw more than 120 nonsense papers generated by a computer, random sentences created just by sticking random phrases together, which have been accepted. Right. Many of you would class yourselves as nanoscientists. Can we get the lights down at the front? Is that possible? So this was published in Nano Letters, which for many nanoscientists, it's an American Chemical Society journal. Many people would think that Science, Nature, PNAS, for example, then the next tier down would be Nano Letters. So it's a pretty prestigious journal. And if you're interested in nonsense like impact factors, it's got quite a large impact factor. They really are nonsense. But what they've done is they've taken a distribution, a suspension of nanorods in a solvent, and they've put them down on a surface. And remarkably, you get this really highly correlated interaction between the nanorods. It's really quite remarkable. You know, and certainly if I got that paper to review, I'd have gone, what the hell is going on at the vertex there? What the hell is happening here to drive that? Why would they ever do that? And then in the supplementary information, which of course the bloody referees didn't read, we've got this. And now this is really bloody lazy, because you see this little blip here? That's that little blip. And you see that little blip there? That's that little blip. So, not Saoirse this time, but my elder daughter, Neve, said, or she's 10, Daddy, why didn't they cut them outright? This was last year, Nano Letters, accepted. Right? Now, it's now rejected, retracted, I should say, withdrawn. But you know what? If it hadn't been for online criticism via blogs, online criticism via something called PubPeer, and other types of online post-publication peer review, I'm fairly certain that would still be out there. For example, Nano Letters, unlike American Physical Society journals, doesn't have doesn't allow you to publish comments which are critical of previous work. And indeed, I know for a fact that one editor of an ACS journal has said that we will not, in block capitals, publish critiques of previously published data unless there's new experimental data. And this will be the last show of hands I'd like. Sorry about this. Sharon Hendrick. Oh, good. Thanks. Even before I asked, the hands go up. Right. For those of you who don't know, this was a shocking case. Loads and loads of papers in Nature and Science back about, well, it's over a decade ago, 2002, something like that. Late 90s, early 2000s, something like that. Fabricated. Right. And the way he was found out after publishing all this was that he basically used the same figure down to the noise in two different publications, apparently from two different devices, and then it all started to unravel. So this is not a new thing, but the great thing with online peer review, which I'll get to in a second, is that I think these type of abuses and these type of frauds are spotted much more quickly and the scientific record corrected more quickly. So this is Stephen Curry's blog. It's called Reciprocal Space. Subscribe to it. It's great, not just in terms of publication, but also Stephen blogs about a range of different aspects of science funding policy, big proponent of open access, these types of things. So he had this blog post called Sick of Impact Factors back a couple of years ago. Great opening line. Look at that for punchiness. I'm sick of impact factors and so is science. Right? And what he says, and if you can take this message home to your supervisors and to anybody else who says, we shouldn't submit to this journal because impact factors are a bit dodgy, we should go to this journal. He calls the use of impact factors statistically illiterate. For the reasons why, just sick of impact factors, Google it and read that, and then maybe pin it up to the wall in your lab or whatever. Because this nonsense about impact factors, we have got to stop it. It is, you know, when it comes to, you are all probably going to be looking for, well, a large number of you will be looking for postdoctoral positions. A large number of you may well be postdocs. And it is ridiculous that when postdocs apply for fellowships or postdocs apply for lectureships, what happens is that the committee goes, well, this is CV and this is CV. Well, this person's got better publications than this one. How do you know? Have you read those publications? No. What you're doing is you're going, it's in science, therefore it's good. And that's, again, very dangerous. So, faulty or fraudulent. So in some cases, it's just, we all make mistakes. We all make mistakes. It doesn't have to be fraud, but the problem is those mistakes, if they stay in the literature, can lead people astray. How do we fix it? And I am coming to the close now. Right, I said it was the last show of hands. I'll just ask for one more. It's great for me just to get this feedback. So PubPeer, how many of you have heard of PubPeer? Two. Okay, can we get the lights back up again? That'd be good. Yeah. Okay, 2 or 3 people. Again, go and Google PubPeer. PubPeer has its issues, has its problems, but I think I'm now becoming convinced that the advantages not only outweigh, but far outweigh the disadvantages. So what PubPeer is, it's like a big repository of comments on papers. So if you publish a paper and it's got a DOI, then in principle it's in the PubPeer database, which means anybody can comment on it. Now, some people, minority, comment in their own names. The large number of people comment under cover of anonymity, and you could argue that there were issues, that there were problems with that. I would agree with you. But this is perhaps one of the, it says high-profile stem cell papers. Not only is the papers themselves high-profile, the whole case that developed after this was high-profile. Some of you might be aware of this. There have been 2 papers, Japanese group, retracted on stem cell research. The reason that got retracted so quickly is because of PubPeer. The papers went up, and loads of people, if you go and look at PubPeer, you'll find we're going, what? How does this work? Have they done this? Have they done this? Have they done this? That led to another blogger setting up a site to say, can we actually reproduce this? And 8 or 9 groups said, no, we can't do it. Very, very quickly, that all started to unravel on a much shorter timescale than the Sharon case. Much, weeks rather than years. So, and the great thing about PubPeer, the most recent thing, oh, where's it gone? Okay. No, that's not the great thing about it. The great thing about it, I'll get back to that in a second, is that now there's a plugin for all browsers where you go to the paper, and if you've got that plugin enabled, it tells you from the DOI, anywhere there's a DOI, even if it's a blog post, it tells you where the comments are. So you can look at this, and you've got a direct link between the paper and, well, this has been published, but, you know, we've just seen the level of per work that can get published. And this allows us to sort of correct the record much more quickly. A disclaimer, we've been heavily involved with PubPeer, this paper, but that's a whole other story in terms of observer bias and striped nanoparticles. So what I'd just like to leave you with is that, you know, PubPeer is very good, but there is this issue of an anonymity. And people, for example, who might have a non-scientific axe to grind, you know, under cover of anonymity, might, you know, post comments that mightn't be the most scientific. And it can get quite vitriolic, and it can get quite heated, the debate. But as I say, on balance, I think PubPeer is going to be a good thing. So I honestly think, just closing final statement, that there's quite a lot of inertia amongst quite a lot of researchers for this type of online peer review and this type of modification of the peer review system. I think it can only be a good thing, particularly if we've got to get the publications out there really quickly so we pick up the headlines and we generate a lot of online activity. We need something that's just as responsive as quickly as that. I think for the next generation, for you, this type of thing will be de rigueur. You'll just do it and you won't even think about it. Thank you for paying attention. It's been a real pleasure.